to the Hypatia podcast. I'm Anura, and this is a place where we honor words by women for women. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we're here with special guests Trista Hendren and Joan Marler. And I'll tell you a little bit about them. In 2011, Trista Hendren founded Girl God Books to support a necessary unraveling of the patriarchal world view of divinity. Her first book, The Girl God, a children's picture book, was a response to her own daughter's inability to see herself reflected in God. Since then, she has published more than 25 books by a dozen women from across the globe, with help from her husband, Anders, mother, Pat, and son, Joey. Welcome, Trista.
Thank you so much for having
me. And one of the books she worked on is Re-Visioning Medusa, From Monster to Divine Wisdom. And the preface was written by Joan Marler, and Joan is here with us today. Welcome, Joan.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And let me go ahead and introduce you. Joan is the founder and executive director of the Institute of Archaeomythology, and I hope you'll tell us a little bit more about that. She's the editor of The Civilization of the Goddess by Marija Gimbutas, and From the Realm of the Ancestors, an anthology in honor of Marija Gimbutas. She worked closely with her as her personal editor from 1987 to 1994 and lectures internationally on her life and work. Joan Marler initiated courses in archaeomythology at 2 graduate schools in San Francisco, the New College of California and the California Institute of Integral Studies. She taught modern folk and ethnic dance for 28 years through Santa Rosa Junior College in Northern California. From 1982 to 1996, she worked as an independent producer and radio journalist for KPFA-FM in Berkeley, California. Welcome.
Thank you.
I was a DJ for a while in college, and I really enjoyed working all the controls and playing music. But you were a journalist then for radio?
Yes, and during that time, I had my own program for part of the time anyway. It was called Voices of Vision, and it was a really great experience to have an hour every week and to be able to scan the universe and find people who doing what I felt was the most fascinating and essentially important work. And so I was able to this is mostly a live program to bring people into the studio to speak particularly about women's spirituality issues. And that was during the time of the burgeoning the beginnings of the women's spirituality goddess movement. So there was a lot going on, a lot of goddess books being published by Harper San Francisco at that time. And so it was a great time to be on the air.
Wonderful. I remember in college when I was studying for my minor in religion, I was often arguing with my professors that yes, we can capitalize goddess. Please don't deduct points off of my paper. Back in the 90s. And all right, so I have been reading through Re-Visioning Medusa, From Monster to Divine Wisdom. And I just love this colorful cover by Arna Bartz. Did I say that right? Oh, good. And you normally don't think of Medusa as colorful. Her snakes and her features being soft, full of light. You know, so many people are used to her as that big green kind of claymation monster from the movie Clash of the Titans from the 80s. Um, so why don't you two tell the audience and myself how you both got involved with this Medusa book and how you met?
You want to
You go
Oh.
ahead.
Let's start with Trista. Tell me a little bit about Girl God Books and then how the Medusa project developed.
Yeah, I'm worried we're going to have too much to talk about, so I'm going to just skip ahead to Medusa. Glynis Livingstone had written this beautiful children's book, I think maybe 20 years ago, if I remember correctly. And it was just sort of sitting there, and she said, would you like to take a look at it? Because I love children's books. And I was like, yeah, of course. And I loved it. And Arna agreed to illustrate it. And then we put it out, I think, in 2016. And then we realized there was so much more there, and we wanted to do an anthology. And I think Joan and I have said also we could have done 2 or 3 anthologies on Medusa. I mean, there's just so much there, actually. I don't even feel like we even scratched the surface yet, although there's so many books to write also. So I don't know, maybe we'll do another one later. But and then Joan and I were in contact from there. And of course, she's amazing and just an encyclopedia of knowledge. So we should probably rack her brain while we have her on the program.
Oh, right. And I realized I forgot to light our candle.
Oh, I can light mine.
You know, one thing I loved about the book and this candle is for all of our benevolent ancestresses who've come before us and the mighty dead. Their words who've inspired us, both written and spoken. I burned a laurel leaf because in Greece, the poets and writers used to wear laurel leaf crowns.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that spirit of words and that sense of channeling words through our inner wisdom and the words of other women who've gone before us that we gather here today. So, Joan, you've worked very close with Marija Gimbutas, who, could you tell us a little bit about her theory that really changed the view of women in history, and especially in the Neolithic and Bronze Age?
How many hours do we have? First, I wanted to just point out that behind me on the shelf is an altar Maria right here, and there's a candle burning there. So just to know that it's there. I was covering it with my head, but I'll try to stay over here. Meeting Marija for me was a life-changing experience. And since I was on radio and I gained confidence, I got my voice, and I just thought, I have to find her, because I'd heard about her from Joseph Campbell, and I had one of these primal experiences that I felt like some great deity had reached down and just gone right up my chakras, and I was listening to Campbell, but he was talking about Marija, and I was having this primal experience, realizing I have to find her. And when I did find her, I interviewed her, and shortly after that, she asked me to work with her as her editor. And that really launched an incredible experience that I've had. And I've noticed that a lot of women have had this experience of her work has enlivened and brought everything together that we've been working on to a new view, to the long view, to going back into prehistory and then looking forward, and being able to see that the ancient Greeks are not so ancient. it's really like modern history in comparison to the Neolithic and Paleolithic, and how the imagery of women, the role of women, the presence of women, is still articulated in stone or in clay, painted on pottery, with a primary image all the way through. Of course, the Paleolithic didn't have pottery, but so basically, she had been a Bronze Age scholar, and but she was aware of something very different happening in Europe before the Bronze Age. Something everything about it was different. So she focused on then the last several decades of her life to find out what was going on in the Neolithic period among the earliest farmers, and why were they making all of these female images, and why was their art so different? Why was the imagery on the pottery flowing with spirals, with this beautiful sense of symmetry and dynamism and aesthetic development that later on just deteriorated, basically, with the Bronze Age, when, with the weapons coming in and with the change of social structure and male dominance and all of that. So she devoted her work to answering a lot of different questions that other people were not asking. And she was bringing together a multidisciplinary approach to her work, and realizing that just archaeology itself, which had become so focused on not only uh, uh, patterns of how villages were constructed and the economies and so on and so forth, but she was saying that for her to really understand the earlier societies, she had to be able to investigate people's beliefs and people's rituals, and because that was so much a part of the earlier societies. So she created an interdisciplinary way of investigation of beliefs and rituals and symbolism and all that she called archaeomythology. And
I love that word.
so anyway, this is what I was fortunate enough to absorb while I was working with her. And I edited, I had the privilege of editing The Civilization of the Goddess, and that totally changed my life.
And then you went on to study archaeomythology, and you even have your own foundation then, the Institute of Archaeomythology. Could, if you could sum that up, if you could define it, how would you define archaeomythology?
Well, I mentioned it's an interdisciplinary methodology, an interdisciplinary way of bringing together various disciplines, not as just separate units making a cluster, but really studying what is brought forward in different disciplines. For instance, mythology. Lots and lots of work on mythology. Archaeology, of course, the material culture and what has endured through time, the artifacts there. Comparative religion, philosophy, linguistics. Linguistics was a really important part of her work and important part of archaeomythology, because there are life ways encoded in language. And so many, I mean, all of these disciplines have scholars who have spent their lifetimes in studying, and then through decades. And so material can be brought together and utilized to get a multidimensional view, and that's what she did, to try to parse together what these early societies, before writing, by the way, what we can actually tell about them. And she was really a master at it. And so, anyway, there's a lot to be said about archaeomythology. So after she passed away, I thought it would be really important to have a place to bring scholars together who are interested in this form of inquiry. And so I and some other friends and colleagues actually created the Institute of Archaeomythology back in around, well, formally in 2003, but informally earlier, to be able to have a place where you can inspire each other and have publications about it and so on.
I feel so lucky that she took the time to unearth those cultures, that civilization, and to interpret such important symbols as a spiral. I really, it's hard for me to imagine women's mysteries without, that spiral. That reminds me of, starting at your navel in a way and going round, or the spinning of the heavens and the spinning of the seasons. And I remember how frustrated I was in college in the 90s, when I would bring up her thoughts that there was once a very egalitarian, woman-centered society before, more warlike patriarchal types swept in. And I would bring that up in my classes, and the professors say, well, she's more of a hobbyist. She didn't really, understand that. And this is kind of, modern feminist mythology. But what I'm hearing from you is what a serious scholar she was. She had such a deep methodology to put everything into place. And I really hope our listeners will go and read up more on her, or maybe look into some of her books. So in let me see here. What there are so many different versions of the Medusa story, and I was really surprised to hear that it is all across Europe, and not just necessarily in Italy and Rome. Tell me, let's bring Trista back into the conversation. Do you have a favorite version of the Medusa story that's beyond the one that's most common, where the one with her and Perseus?
I mean, I like all of the retellings. I think Laura Shannon had a really interesting perspective on hers, kind of from a psychological perspective, on that Medusa and Athena are actually allies and not adversaries. I think when I post blog posts with excerpts from the book, that one often really resonates with people, because we've always been taught this thing that they, hated each other and whatnot. I mean, for me, they're all stories, so you don't really know exactly what happened way back when, but I think it's really important to revision different narratives and look at it from a different perspective. And, it's hard because we have this very male-oriented educational system, and just like what you were speaking to earlier, I don't think Marija Gimbutas got her due at all when she was alive. As far as I understand, it seems like she never really got the full due that she deserved. So I think we have so much unburying to do before women scholars ever really get their full due, and where we can even fully listen to or accept new narratives, because we've been taught, that's still how my children are taught here in Norway, even that, okay, this is how things are. And, it's a very male-oriented approach. We have, my daughter to date has had one day in women's history. It makes me angry, actually.
It needs to be year-round, just like we say with Black History Month, that needs to be year-round.
It all should be integrated, and that's one of the projects that I'm working on, and I haven't even told you about this, Joan, but we want to bring a goddess center here where children can also come and learn about women's history, different goddesses, because they teach a full curriculum here of all the different world religions, but they don't mention goddess at all, which is crazy and drives me nuts. So my idea is, I would like to have a museum and art rooms and artists in residence, and bring all the foremothers for the christening. And of course, Joan has to come. and just have this beautiful center because, and also have it be online. But I think Bergen is the perfect place for it because likely, you know, we could get state funding, we can also get donations, but I really want to bring it front and center around the world that we have to change this dynamic that we have now. And I think we need to do it in a big way. We can't, you know, we've been all working so hard, and we need to just have this like, oh, push.
That's wonderful, and that's really what your publications are all about. And I love how you phrase this, Trista. The one reason you started, you know, allowing more women voices in print. I shouldn't say allowing, more like lifting them up. It feels like gatekeepers only allow us through once in a while, but you're really lifting them up to support a necessary unraveling of the patriarchal worldview of divinity. And I really think that's something that you do, Joan, and the great example of that is how the Medusa mythology has been unraveled. How looking at the archaeology, the stories before it changed when am I getting that right? The story started to change as there was more patriarchy in Greece and Rome. She went from being a creatrix, in command of birth, life, death, having all those powers of the creatrix of nature at her command, and really becoming just a monster. And I think lots of women feel that way, that often just our anger is seen, our
Most
fear is
powerful
seen.
women are turned into monsters. And I can't remember, Joan, you probably know, but is it Mary Beard who did a whole series on Medusa and how other powerful women were also turned into monsters. And I think that's a very common narrative that's been employed again and again, you know, like a woman starts to gain power and then you squash her down. And of course, you know, we have all the name calling and it's easy. And of course, rape to me is a very much still to this day is used as a tool of oppression to bring down powerful women. And you know, most of us that have sexual abuse or rape in our past, myself included, it's very hard to get over that. I mean, it's I don't want to say a lifetime process. I hope it's not, but it feels that way sometimes to me, that it's really difficult. And that is a really easy way to just squash the soul of someone. And it has to stop. It should never be tolerated. And it is tolerated.
Instead of our backgrounds being looked at and scrutinized, really, yeah, the focus needs to be on the perpetrator. And I think by you know, shaming and scrutinizing women when they come forward, that's how we get turned into monsters, I think, in the public eye. Let's see.
I'd just like to add something there, and that is
please do.
It's easy to focus on the individual, but it's a systemic problem. It's a systemic problem that's been going on for millennia, basically, and for 5,000 years. And one of the things that's really, really fascinating about developments in archaeology, I have to say, has to do with the genetic developments and that technology. And what's been found there is just revolutionizing archaeology, archaeological interpretations, and so on, and also has caused a real appreciation for Marija's work too. I mean, there's a big sea change that's happened because so many things that she has said about the transition between what she calls old Europe, the settled societies of Europe, with the first farmers, the first people who developed a civilization over 3,000 years, and then its demise, by people coming in from the steppes with weapons and male dominance and all of that. But she was poo-pooed as some kind of, crazy woman saying that.
Mm.
But actually, the genetic data that's coming forth is saying that's really true. And on a very fine-grained level, what the genetics is showing is that when these steppe people came in, people from north of the Black Sea on horseback with weapons and so on, came into Europe, there was a total change in the genetic fabric of Europe from that point. The Y chromosome, which is the male chromosome carried in, uh, took over, and the male, the Y chromosome of the farmers, of the old Europeans, plummeted. But what happened was that in the genetics, what is clearly shown is that women, old European women, were captured and brought in and forced to live and produce children and function in these societies of steppe people. So that transition that took place was, exactly as Marija said, a very traumatic one. It's not only shown in the archaeological record, but it's shown in great detail by the genetic material that shows that women who were abducted, they were forced, maybe they were like sexual slaves, or also they brought their own rich traditions of, of weaving, of pottery making, of all those things that represented the high society, not high society, but the very well developed civilization of old Europe into the steppe people's sphere, because it was really of a much more developed and more elegant and functional state of culture. So that started 5,000 years ago, and it started with an extreme trauma for women, and the whole change of peacefulness and all of those elements that make up societies that are most engendering of the life force and people connecting to the natural world and to each other in a viable way, and were truncated and changed, and male dominance took over. And that became a template for what we have inherited all the way down. And so many things, as we knew, in the study of history, can show us that. And we're also still working that out within ourselves about how do we manage the trauma that we have inherited. Um, I'm sure that there are many, many women who, investigating the trauma that they carry, realize that it's much larger than your own personal history. It goes back. I mean, think of the Inquisition. Think of the incredible trauma of the organized brutalization and killing of women that happened in Europe and then was transported to other places of the world, in order to make sure that women are basically cleansed of the ancient traditions and their ancient knowledge, so they can be functional within the male dominant system. And it takes a lot of trauma to do that. And so I think that it's important to have the long view. And the image of Medusa, the is like a microcosm of that change and of the demonization of female powers. And as you mentioned, Tara, um, the Medusa actually represents the whole range of generative powers, as well as the death and regeneration powers. And so, of course, she was considered very dangerous to the male system. However, she was abducted. She was utilized. Her powers were utilized for the protection of the patriarchal system, and that's not just a projection. That's really, you look at the image of the Medusa during the classical period and how she was used. She was used as an apotropaic image. And apotropaic means that she was protected. She turns away those powers that would be dangerous, because she was so dangerous. And she was she was used for patriarchal purposes, so then she was serving patriarchal purposes, even though that was not initial reason for being. So it's a very complex image, a very rich image, and it's an image that is female in all of her powers. And she's definitely worth looking at. And the iconography of Medusa speaks of all of that. And it's too bad we don't have some of the imagery to look at right now, because but I encourage people to investigate. And one way to investigate is to get the book put out by Trista. And there are so many articles in this book that investigate different aspects of it by women scholars. And so to come from women scholars is very important. Women who have found the significance of the Medusa for themselves and are not coming with this idea that she's just this monster that needs to be continually controlled.
I like how you mentioned in the forward, Joan, that the invaders had an idea of God up in the sky, where before the matrilineal cultures had the idea of goddess all around us, being that part of creation. And you wrote, it is no surprise then that the earth deities of the old religion were demonized or co-opted. And yet it's interesting then that they still revere the power. They couldn't completely kill her magic, her spirit, because they used her head, and as you said, in so much imagery to protect temples, to protect homes. And I really see, the Girl God books, the work you're doing, Trista, and I hope you're able to come up with your center there, to lift up different goddesses. And your work, Joan, working in archaeomythology, is helping us to recapture those stories, to reweave that power now in our times. In a way, it's almost like putting Medusa's head back on.
Exactly. Putting the decapitated head back on the wisdom body is the way I like to think of it.
Yes. Well, is there anything you would like to add in closing?
I would like to add that it's very auspicious to be doing this program right now, because we are in January, and in just a few days, it will be Marija Gimbutas' 100th birthday. And we're beginning the centennial year of her birth. And there are going to be a number of events celebrating her, and really recognizing that her contribution to society, to the world, to the understanding of the deep history of human society is something very vast. And even UNESCO has recognized her. They consider 2021 as a year to be celebrated in her honor because of her work. And I think that that's a real tribute not only to Marija, but also to the wisdom of UNESCO to do that. And so events are happening all over the world. So this is an important time. So she passed away in 1994, but her spirit and her work lives and is vibrant and more important now than ever before. And she was very much aware that in order for us to survive on this planet and for life on this planet to survive, we have to shift from just being devouring everything, to realizing that if we don't return to an acknowledgement of the miracle of life and see that all of the natural world and all of life is sacred, we're not going to survive. And this is a critical time right now, and that burgeoning awareness of the enormous death that is happening now because of human activity, because we have not honored the earth, and we have not honored women, and we've not honored. I mean, we all have to be honored. Men, women, all people of all races, people everywhere, and all of the animals and all the living things. We are a human community. We are a life community, and that humans are just part of the fabric of life. We're not just the most important thing in the world. So there has to be a shift, and that shift we can look back to the earliest civilization of the world, old Europe, as Maria describes it, and see an example uh, of for us of how to live. Let's say happy birthday, Maria.
We have a lot of work ahead of us. And maybe if we put women and their stories in the center, if we start to listen more to our intuition and give each other space for that, we can find that connection again to the world around us. So we're less likely to abuse it. Thank you so much for your words.
I would like to thank Trista for your dedicated work in bringing out these books, particularly for children and for children of all ages who benefit from it, because so many people don't know of Medusa, for instance, or have only, you know, haven't had a view of her more complex but more relevant and exquisitely important significance. So thank you, Trista, for that.
Yes.
That means so much to me, Joan, because your work is like.
Did you expect your first book to turn into this wonderful thing that people are reading around the world in so many different titles?
No, that's actually not the first. I never published the first book that I wrote. I don't know if I ever will. It's very personal, but yeah, no, I just did it with the encouragement of my husband, and then there just were always more projects and more things. I am interested in so many different things, so I would like to do all the goddesses. And I mean, it's more than just me now. We have so many different women involved because I couldn't do this on my own.
Yeah, there's so many beautiful voices in all the anthologies.
And primarily women, because for me, when you see a quote, it's almost always from a man, and I very rarely quote men anywhere. And I'm a little bit allergic to that because I get, even if you see a list of like people's favorite books, it's like man, 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 all the quotations you see online, it's almost always men. So I try to kind of fix that in my own way and like elevate the voices of women, because that's just something that's really important to me. And I didn't grow up hearing these stories. I grew up in a very patriarchal home, and that was very damaging to me. And I didn't want to say
I did too.
So.
And then when I had, it was actually a Church of Christ minister who introduced me to the goddess. She said, "Here, read this spiral dance. Read Women Who Run with the Wolves." And
there's a lot of those pastors in the UCC, actually.
She introduced me to Maria.
Oh wow, that's so cool.
And I was like, "What? There was a woman-run society? Don't tell the church." Like,
I'd like to say something, and that is that I think both Trista and Tara represent this women who are motivated to bring forth in the world what they want to see in the world and what needs to be in the world. And there's so much that we all carry within ourselves that can be brought forward. And one of the things that Maria said was, if you have the impulse to do something, then you must do it. And that was
do it.
Her whole life. You must do it. And don't like, oh well, whatever you're, no, you must do it. If it's something that really burns inside of you, or you have a burning question, and then one thing leads to another and to another, and it will unfold in your life. And this is how transformation takes place. And so, once again, I want to thank Trista for following your vision and following your passion to do what then is beneficial to so many, more than you could ever even know. I'm sure, as your work lives in the world. And the same thing for you, Tara, that you are motivated to do all the work necessary to bring forth this series that you are doing, and whatever else you are doing, because it comes from a place of not just intellectual inquiry, but the sense that this has to happen. This must be explored. We have to have these conversations. We have to celebrate something that otherwise is, just disappears. So that my gratitude to both of you and to everyone who is following their passion to bring forth in the world what we must have. And we're in it together. You find that you're not alone, that there are so many people in this world who will respond and who said, yes, thank you so much. Thank you for your work is nurturing to me.
And I have to add one more thing and then I have to go. But Joan, I just have to say, I've only seen, of course, I never met Marija, and I know I'm terrible with names, but in real life, but just from the videos that I've seen of her, she has so much character and life, and I can only imagine what it must have been like for you to absorb all of that energy and light and knowledge. And I see her light, and it's really beautiful. Like I just,
Oh,
really, really wonderful.
definitely share any links you have so that I can share those videos with others, or if you have any links to maybe any videos of Maria, or you can I don't know if there's any documentaries about her, but I'd love to share those.
I think there's, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for coming here today to the Hypatia podcast. And I just want to encourage everybody to keep finding your inner joy at being a woman, and finding your inner creativity to share these stories through words, spoken word, written word, art, however you decide to celebrate. Let's just celebrate women. I love that.
Thank you. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
And happy birthday, Maria.
Yes, happy birthday. How auspicious.